My soul is vexed within me so, to think that I'm a slave. I'm now resolved to strike the blow for freedom or the grave. From the early 1800s to the 1870s, 30 to 100,000 freedom seekers fled bondage in the slave states of the American South and headed north. Their sights were set on Canada, which had abolished slavery in the early 1800s. The Underground Railroad was their escape route and consisted of a clandestine network of pathways and safe houses. The railroad was also a resistance, made up of guides called conductors, station masters who provided shelter, and agents who passed along vital information.
It's the first interracial, interethnic civil rights movement in the history of the United States, because you have people fighting for freedom and literally violating the law for that freedom.
Dr. Eric Jackson, director of the Black Studies program at Northern Kentucky University, is committed to giving this movement's largely undocumented history a voice.
The principles that Thomas Jefferson talks about in the Declaration of Independence, that all men are created equal, obviously didn't apply to people of African descent at the time. But for folks who were involved in the Underground Railroad, those principles were like gold.
Human ingenuity, the human spirit, has a way of triumphing.
The former enslaved, abolitionists, church clergy, and free African Americans were the main participants, making this human railroad the most integrated undertaking of its era.
1830s is when the term Underground Railroad comes out, and it's the same time that the railroad itself starts to be produced.
From that point on, freedom seekers and their allies were associated with the railroad industry, but unlike the actual train tracks being constructed from east to west, their routes were much more fluid. The free border states of Ohio and Indiana became key conduits. The Ohio River, nicknamed the River Jordan, was the last physical barrier to cross between North and South.
At that time, the river itself was maybe a third of the size it is now. So in the wintertime, it would freeze over, and you could literally walk across the river.
Louisville, Kentucky sits on the southern bank of the Ohio River. In the mid-19th century, this transportation hub had one of the largest slave markets in the country.
So here's the deal. We're gonna take these, whatever vegetables that look manageable, throw it in. Reuse everything, because that's exactly how it works.
Locust Grove, National Historic Landmark and a living history museum, is a few miles outside of Louisville. Built in 1792 by a Revolutionary War hero, the estate was home to generations of enslaved African Americans who also played a pivotal role in building our nation.
If our food doesn't have color, it's not black food.
Michael Twitty is a James Beard Award-winning author and historical interpreter who specializes in African American food cultures and traditions, as well as their influence on American cuisine. By retracing his ancestors' footsteps throughout the South, he's experienced the hardships they had to endure to put food on their own and the plantation owners' tables.
I'm not cosplaying slavery. I'm reminding people that our ancestors were as much a part of the American story as everybody else. The majority of the people who lived on this property were not white, and yet we know the least amount about them.
It's the invisibility.
Yes.
Michael Twitty also has a deep personal connection to the freedom seekers.
My great-great-great-grandfather tried to run away from slavery. And he doesn't make it. He spent the rest of his life in a cotton plantation, and he's returned for the sum of $5. $5. It's like, what do you do with that?
Michael's answered his own question by educating the public about one of the most tangible legacies of slavery, Southern foods and soul food.
You talk about cultural totems. What's bigger than food? Nothing.
Right.
Enslaved cooks utilized African cooking techniques and added imported ingredients and spices to the local foods of the South.
The food of our country passed through the hands of enslaved Africans. So much of what we celebrate today came at an absolutely unfathomable cost.
And that's what makes this both comfort food and discomfort food.
Locust Grove and surrounding Louisville also have two sides to their stories.
Unlike other plantations in the lower South, a lot of these folks are working in town.
That's where the Whisper community started.
That's right. We like to say that our ancestors were empty-handed when they came on those boats, but they weren't empty-headed.
Compared to the isolation of plantations in the Deep South, enslaved locals here had access to an information network, and many learned about potential freedom right across the river in Indiana.
The entire story of food is a story about power, access, ability, identity.
Haves, have-nots.
Enslaved cooks played a pivotal role, trading knowledge and goods with their neighbors and providing sustenance for those on the run.
These women in these kitchens had immense influence, immense power. That big house cook might wrap up a biscuit, some cornbread, a piece of ham, and that may save somebody's life at the next stop.
Two of Michael's recipes, burgoo and hoe cakes, are inspired by the Bluegrass Cookbook, first published in 1904. It was one of the first books that acknowledged the role that enslaved African cooks and their descendants had in shaping American food culture.
It's one of the few cookbooks where the black cook is treated with a level of dignity and equality as opposed to being a symbol of subservience.
I mean, look at that.
Burgoo, or affectionately called roadkill stew, has been a Kentucky staple for over 1.5 centuries and is now the official state dish. This hearty stew is a symbol of enslaved cooks' creativity, making use of whatever meat and vegetables were in season.
I'm just gonna tend this fire a little bit.
Yes, sir.
And I'm assuming you just want some light color on the rabbit?
Yeah.
Michael's dish is no different. The original recipe calls for any type of small to medium wild bird. Michael's substituted rabbit and thrown in freshly picked spring vegetables and young potatoes.
And that's heaven in a spoon.
Yeah, this is good stuff.
Rabbit is just such clean, beautiful food. We need to be eating more of that. This is the food of hardship that's been cooked forever.
As enslaved peoples were transported worldwide, so were many of their native crops and seeds. Michael seasoned the burgoo with a melange of nutmeg, cinnamon, ginger, red pepper, garlic, and onion. A taste of West Africa in a Kentucky cast iron pot.
This is,
It's what we call sopping in the South.
I like to sop. That's so exquisite.
Corn, imported from native North America, spread throughout Africa in the 1500s. Africans turned it into a daily provision, cooking dishes such as hoe cakes, flatbreads, and couche, a savory mix of cornbread crumbs, stock, bacon, onion, and hot pepper.
This is a life changer.
That is the forerunner of cornbread dressing. For enslaved children, this was like the treat above all treats, and we were crazy about Couche. It was often something their mothers made for them with everything they had, and they turned into a delicacy.
This is remarkable.
Couche and hoe cakes were portable and could be meals eaten by a freedom seeker on the run.
There's one account where the straw hat became the bowl to mix up the mush to fry on a rock.
These foods represent the fight to hold on to their identity while in bondage and on their journeys towards sovereignty.
We were the greatest commodity in early America. How you survive your oppression is your greatest form of cultural capital. It's kind of like this art of putting gold on your wounds. It's not just the perfection, it's the imperfection that they heal and make beautiful.
I love that.
Enslaved cooks relied on innate talent over technology to put daily meals on the table.
Cooking over live fire in a real hearth is the most fun you can have cooking, my opinion. My opinion.
It is.
Most Underground Railroad routes have been lost to history. But in Ohio, you can actually walk in the footsteps of the freedom seekers.
When you get on this trail, you really understand how real it actually was.